David had always been the kind of person who believed that life had more to offer than just waking up, going to work, and going home. But at 27, he felt trapped in a cycle he could barely break. Every morning, he got up before dawn, tied his worn-out shoes, and walked the familiar route to the small factory at the edge of town. It was the same path he had taken for years, lined with cracked sidewalks, empty lots, and houses that seemed frozen in time. He knew every crack, every pothole, every faded street sign. It was a path he had walked so many times that it had become more than just a road. It was a symbol of how predictable his life had become. At work, David's days were filled with machines that rattled and buzzed from morning till evening. The air smelled of oil and metal, and every corner of the factory was crowded with people who had given up on dreams long ago. He liked his co-workers in small ways, but most of them were quick to point out why he would never succeed at anything beyond this life. They had families to support, bills to pay, and responsibilities that made them afraid to dream. David understood their caution, but it stung to hear it again and again. "You're wasting your time thinking about that," one co-worker said one morning as they tightened a bolt on a machine together. "These ideas of yours won't get you anywhere. You need to focus on reality." David forced a smile, nodding politely, but inside, frustration bubbled. He had spent countless nights sketching plans for a small business he wanted to start. A project that involved repairing and customizing bicycles. It was something he loved, something that made him feel alive. He knew it wasn't an easy path, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something more. He tried to tell himself it was just a hobby, but deep down he knew it wasn't. After work, the walk home was always quiet. Sometimes he passed kids playing in the empty lot, their laughter echoing against the walls of old buildings. He would stop and watch for a moment, imagining himself teaching them to ride bikes he had fixed himself, painting their bikes in bright colors, and showing them how to take care of them. These moments of imagination were brief escapes, but they gave him a sense of purpose he couldn't find anywhere else. At home, David's apartment was small and simple, with peeling paint on the walls and a bed that sagged in the middle. He didn't have much, but it was enough to keep him safe and warm. He had a small desk by the window where he kept notebooks filled with ideas, sketches, and plans. The pages were dog-eared and worn, filled with lists, drawings, and notes in different colors of ink. Sometimes he would stare at them for hours, imagining what it would be like if he could turn those sketches into reality. But just as often, doubt crept in. Maybe they're right, he thought. Maybe I'm just dreaming too big. It wasn't just the people at work who doubted him. Even some family members, well-meaning but cautious, would shake their heads when he talked about his plans. "You're young and idealistic," one relative said during a family dinner. "It's good to dream, but don't forget life isn't always kind. You need to be practical." David nodded, smiling politely as he pushed his food around the plate, but inside anger mixed with sadness. It hurt to hear that people he cared about didn't fully believe in him. It wasn't that they didn't want him to succeed. They were afraid he might fail and get hurt. But their fear felt like chains, keeping him from moving forward. He often lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things he could do, all the risks he wanted to take, and all the ways he could prove to himself that he was capable. One evening, after another long day at the factory, David sat by the small window in his apartment, looking out at the dimly lit streets. The city was quiet, with only the occasional car passing by and streetlights casting long shadows. He held one of his notebooks in his hands, tracing the lines of a bike design he had been working on for months. It was a simple idea, but it was his. He imagined how it would feel to see it built, to see a child ride it for the first time, laughing with joy. That vision made his heart pound, but it also made the weight of doubt heavier. He remembered a day from his childhood when his father had told him, "You can do anything if you work hard, but the world will try to tell you otherwise. Don't listen to it too much, son." That memory gave him some comfort, but the voices of doubt around him were loud and constant. They were in the factory, at home, and even in his own head. Some nights he felt like he was drowning in them, questioning every choice he had ever made. Yet, even in the midst of all that doubt, there was a spark inside David that refused to die. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Every time someone laughed at his ideas or shook their head in disbelief, that spark grew a little brighter. It whispered to him that maybe, just maybe, he could do it, that maybe he didn't have to live a life defined by others' expectations, that maybe he could take control of his own story. On weekends, when the factory was closed, David would wander through the streets of the town, looking for old discarded bicycles in alleyways, junkyards, or behind stores. He would bring them back to his tiny apartment, take them apart, and imagine how he could turn them into something special. The process was slow and painstaking, but it gave him a sense of freedom he couldn't find anywhere else. Each bolt tightened and each piece polished was a small victory, a reminder that he could create something out of nothing. One day, while fixing an old bike in his apartment, David overheard neighbors talking outside. "He'll never make it," one said. "Why waste your time?" The words stung, but instead of making him give up, they lit a fire inside him. He tightened his grip on the wrench and whispered to himself, "I'll show them. Not for them, but for me." That moment marked the beginning of something he didn't fully understand yet. It was the start of a journey fueled not just by hope, but by determination. David's nights became long, filled with sketches, research, and experimenting with different bike parts. He watched videos online about repairs, design, and small businesses. He kept notebooks stacked in one corner of the room, each filled with ideas that slowly began to take shape. Some nights exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, and he would collapse onto his bed, too tired to think. But even then, the spark inside him wouldn't let him rest fully. It whispered, "Keep going. You're closer than you think." Despite the doubts, the laughter, and the discouragement, David began to understand something important. Doubt was everywhere, but determination was inside him. It didn't matter how many people told him he couldn't succeed. What mattered was whether he believed in himself enough to try. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could turn his dreams into reality. Even in the darkest moments, when the world seemed against him, David held on to that spark. He didn't know what the future held, and he didn't know if he would succeed. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to give up without a fight. The voices of doubt would always be there surrounding him, but they no longer had the power to control him. He had something stronger now, something that had been quietly growing inside him for years. Determination. And so, David sat by the window that night, staring at the quiet streets below, holding his notebook, and imagining a life where he could create, build, and inspire. A life where doubt didn't define him, where he could finally take the first steps toward his dream. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges, but he felt ready. For the first time, he truly believed that he could fight back against the doubt, and that belief was enough to keep him moving forward, one step at a time. After the night he promised himself he wouldn't give up, David felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. He had never done anything like this before. His dream of starting something of his own had always felt distant, almost like a story in a book he read once and wished could be real. But now it was real in his mind and he couldn't ignore it. That feeling kept him awake for hours, turning his apartment into a small workshop of ideas and plans. The next morning, David woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even begun to rise and the streets outside were quiet. He brewed a small cup of coffee, cheap and bitter, but it gave him the energy to start his day. He opened his notebook and carefully studied the sketches he had made over the years. There were bikes drawn in every size, shape, and style, each with unique features. Some were practical, some were decorative, and some were ideas he hadn't even dared to try yet. He ran his fingers over the pages, imagining what each bike could become if he worked hard enough. He knew that turning a dream into reality was not easy. He didn't have much money, and he didn't have tools or space to start a proper workshop. But David understood that small steps mattered. He decided to begin by collecting old bicycles that people had discarded. Every evening after work, he walked through the alleys and streets near the market, looking for broken bikes, rusted frames, or parts that could be salvaged. It wasn't glamorous work. The metal cut his hands, and sometimes he would find nothing at all. But every small discovery felt like a treasure. One evening, he found an old bicycle in a trash pile behind a corner store. The paint was chipped, the tires were flat, and the chain was missing. Most people would have looked and walked away, but David's eyes lit up. He carried it carefully back to his apartment, ignoring the weight and the awkward balance. He cleaned it, tightened what screws he could, and began to imagine how it could be transformed. That night he worked until late, taking it apart piece by piece, carefully noting what he would need to replace or fix. Each turn of the wrench, each scrape of rust brought him closer to his goal, Even though he was excited, doubt still crept in. At the factory, coworkers whispered behind his back. "Look at him," one said. "Still playing with junk bikes. He'll never make it." David heard them sometimes, the words echoing in his mind long after he left the factory. For a moment he almost considered quitting. Almost decided to give up and accept the life everyone expected him to live. But each time he remembered the spark he had felt that night at the window. The spark reminded him why he started, and he refused to let it die. David's nights were long and lonely. After finishing a long day at the factory, he would sit in his small apartment surrounded by old tools, bike parts, and notebooks filled with sketches. The work was exhausting. His hands were covered in cuts and calluses, his back ached, and his eyes burned from the strain of staring at tiny details. But the satisfaction of seeing something slowly take shape, of turning a broken bike into something usable, was more rewarding than anything he had felt before. It gave him a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced in years. One weekend, he decided to take a bigger risk. He had saved a little money from his wages and bought a few new tools, wrenches, a small paint kit, and some tires. It was a modest investment, but for him it felt like a lifeline. He worked tirelessly, repairing and customizing an old bike he had found a few days earlier. He painted it in bright colors, fixed the gears, and even added a small basket. When it was finished, he stepped back and looked at it. The bike looked almost new, and for the first time, David felt a surge of pride. He wanted to share his creation, but he also feared rejection. He didn't know if anyone would care, if anyone would appreciate what he had done, but he knew he had to try. The next day, he carefully carried the bike to the small park near the center of town. Children were playing, parents chatting, and some neighbors walked their dogs. He offered the bike to a young boy who had been watching him curiously. The boy's eyes widened, and a smile spread across his face as he climbed onto the seat. His laughter filled the park as he pedaled around. For David, that moment was more valuable than any paycheck or praise. He realized he could make a difference even in small ways. Despite the small successes, life didn't get easier. The factory demanded long hours. His body ached constantly, and the people around him continued to doubt him. Some evenings, when he returned home exhausted, he would sit in his apartment and stare at the ceiling, wondering if it was worth it. Was all this effort really going to lead anywhere? Could he truly make his dream a reality? The questions haunted him, but they also pushed him. They forced him to find new solutions, to work harder, and to be more creative. David began keeping a daily journal, not just about his work on bikes, but about his thoughts, fears, and small victories. Writing helped him clear his mind, organize his ideas, and remind himself why he had started. He would write things like, "Today I fixed the brakes on the old bike. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I saw a smile on that boy's face. That's why I do this." Each entry was a small reminder of progress, and gradually he started to notice changes in himself. He was more patient, more confident, and more willing to take risks. One evening, after another long day, he received an unexpected visitor. A neighbor, who had always been skeptical of his projects, knocked on the door. David hesitated but opened it. The neighbor held a small envelope. "I saw the boy riding the bike," the neighbor said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "It's good work. Keep going." Those simple words meant more to David than he could express. It wasn't praise for fame or money, just recognition that someone saw his effort and cared. That encouragement fueled him, giving him the energy to work late into the night. As weeks passed, David's skills improved. He became more precise with repairs, more creative with designs, and more confident in his abilities. He started experimenting with different styles, combining colors, and even trying small custom features that made his bikes unique. Each bike became a small masterpiece, a reflection of his dedication and creativity. But even as he improved, doubt never fully disappeared. The voices of people who said he would fail still echoed, and there were days when he felt completely alone. One particularly hard day, he found a completely broken bike in a trash pile, so rusted that it seemed impossible to fix. He wanted to walk away, but something inside him refused. He spent hours scraping off rust, straightening bent frames, and replacing parts. By the end of the day, he had a bike that, while far from perfect, could ride. Exhausted, he sat back and smiled, realizing that persistence mattered more than talent. The world could doubt him all it wanted, but he could control how much effort he put into his dream. David also began thinking about the future. He didn't just want to fix bikes for fun. He wanted to create a business, a place where people could come, learn, and ride bikes he had repaired. He imagined a small workshop, filled with laughter, children learning to ride, and parents trusting him to make the experience special. It was a dream that felt distant, but every small victory, every repaired bike brought him closer. He realized that dreams weren't achieved overnight. They were built piece by piece with patience, effort, and resilience. Even in moments of despair, David refused to give up. One night, he sat on the small balcony of his apartment looking at the city lights. The streets were quiet, but he could imagine the energy that would come alive during the day. The children playing, the bikes moving, the laughter filling the air. He thought about all the people who had doubted him, all the co-workers who had laughed, all the relatives who had warned him. He felt no anger toward them. Instead, he felt a quiet determination. Their doubt was not a roadblock. It was a challenge. He realized that he didn't need to prove anything to them. He only needed to prove it to himself. By the end of the month, David had repaired and customized 5 bikes. Each one told a story of effort, patience, and determination. He started leaving them in public spaces for children to ride, secretly watching their reactions from a distance. The joy on their faces was priceless. For the first time, David felt that his work had meaning beyond himself. It wasn't just about proving a point. It was about creating something real, something valuable, and something that could touch people's lives. Through all of this, David understood a simple truth. Life would always be full of challenges, doubts, and setbacks. People would always question, criticize, or dismiss him, but determination was stronger than doubt, and passion could overcome fear. He didn't know where this journey would take him or how far he could go, but he knew one thing. He was no longer the man who sat by the window, unsure and hesitant. He had taken the first steps, and he was moving forward, fueled by determination. And so David continued his work, each day a mix of struggle and small victories. Every repaired bike, every child's smile, every note in his journal reminded him why he had started. The path was long, the journey difficult, but for the first time in his life he felt alive. He was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how uncertain it was. Because he had learned that the only thing stronger than doubt was the determination to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The following weeks were some of the hardest David had ever faced. Even though he had started to see small successes, life still refused to make things easy. His work at the factory remained demanding, with longer shifts and more responsibility. The machine seemed louder than ever, the air heavier and the days longer. By the time he returned to his apartment, exhaustion weighed down every part of him, from his stiff shoulders to his sore hands. Yet he refused to let fatigue stop him from working on his bikes. Every evening, after a simple dinner of bread and vegetables, he would gather the bikes he had found that day or week and start repairing them. Each bike was a puzzle, a challenge, and an opportunity to prove to himself that he could take something broken and make it useful again. The first few he had worked on had been simple repairs, fixing brakes, pumping tires, straightening bent frames. But now he wanted to do more. He wanted to add creativity and style, to make each bike unique. He started experimenting with designs that no one in his town had seen before. Some had brightly colored frames, others had small hand-painted patterns. He added baskets, bells, and even small decorations that children would love. At first, the results were messy. Paint would drip, parts wouldn't fit, and sometimes the bike would wobble no matter how much he tried to fix it. He wanted to give up more than once, but he reminded himself that mistakes were part of the process. He learned from them, adjusting, experimenting, and trying again until he got it right. One day, David decided to test one of his most ambitious ideas. He had taken an old, rusted bike, stripped it down completely, and started building it back up with new parts, new paint, and a small basket on the front. It was far from perfect, and the neighbors watched skeptically. "He's at it again," one of them muttered. "That bike will never work." David ignored the comments and worked late into the night, determined to finish it. By morning, it was ready. Carrying the bike to the park, he nervously watched as children gathered around, curious about what he had done. A little girl with her hair in 2 braids and a shy smile stepped forward. David helped her onto the seat, adjusted the pedals, and pushed gently. She wobbled, then steadied herself, and soon she was pedaling around the park with laughter echoing through the air. The other children cheered and clapped. David's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't about money or recognition. It was about seeing the joy he had created. In that moment, he felt a sense of accomplishment that no factory paycheck could ever give him. Despite these small victories, David faced setbacks that tested his determination. One evening, he found a bike that seemed perfect at first glance, only to discover that the frame was cracked in a way that could not be repaired. He tried everything he knew, reinforcing it, welding, adjusting, but nothing worked. Frustration threatened to overwhelm him, and he felt a heavy weight of failure pressing down on his chest. He could almost hear the whispers of doubt again, the voices that told him he wasn't capable, that he should stick to his job and stop wasting time. But instead of giving up, David did something different. He took a break, stepped outside, and walked to the quiet streets nearby. The night air was cool, the sky clear, and the town asleep. He took a deep breath, letting the silence calm his mind. He realized that failure wasn't the end. It was just a lesson. He reminded himself of the first bike he had repaired, the little boy smiling as he rode it for the first time. That memory gave him strength. If he could bring joy once, he could do it again and again. David also began to think creatively about how to reach more people. He wanted his work to matter beyond his small apartment and the park. He started making small flyers with simple illustrations of his bikes and leaving them in local shops and community centers. Some of the shop owners laughed at first, some ignored him, but a few took the flyers and pinned them to their bulletin boards. Each flyer felt like planting a seed. He didn't know which ones would grow, but he believed that some would. Word started to spread slowly. Children who had ridden his bikes talked to their friends. Parents mentioned the colorful, well-fixed bicycles they had seen in the park. Small groups of people began approaching him, asking about his work. One day, a delivery worker who had noticed David's bikes in the park stopped him. "These bikes are really good," he said. "Do you sell them?" David nodded, heart pounding. He had never sold a bike before, but he realized he was ready. He explained that he was just starting out, and the worker smiled and bought one on the spot. That small sale felt monumental. It was proof that people believed in his work, even when the world around him had doubted him. As his reputation slowly grew, David faced new challenges. He was still working long shifts at the factory, leaving little time for sleep or rest. Balancing the two worlds, his job and his dream, was exhausting. Sometimes he worked late into the night only to wake up early and head to the factory, his body aching and his mind tired. There were nights when he felt overwhelmed, wondering if it was all worth it. But each time he felt that way, he reminded himself of the little victories: a child's smile, a small sale, a kind word from a neighbor. Those moments kept him moving forward. David also began to teach himself new skills. He watched videos online about bicycle repairs, custom designs, and even small business management. He took notes, practiced techniques, and tried new methods. The learning process was slow and often frustrating, but he found joy in it. Each new skill made him more confident, more capable, and more ready to take risks. He began experimenting with features like adjustable seats, painted patterns, and small decorative touches that made his bikes stand out. Every success, no matter how small, built momentum. Despite progress, doubt never completely disappeared. There were still whispers from neighbors, skeptical looks from coworkers, and moments of self-questioning. Some days he felt like he was moving forward, and the next day it felt like he had taken 2 steps back. But David learned to treat doubt like a shadow, present but powerless in the light of his determination. He understood that success wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about pushing forward despite it. One afternoon, he faced a particularly difficult challenge. He had been repairing an old, oversized bicycle, the kind used for long-distance rides. The frame was bent, the chain rusted, and the tires cracked. He spent hours cleaning, adjusting, and testing each component. Just when it seemed almost finished, the chain broke again. Exhausted, he almost threw the bike aside in frustration. But then he remembered the faces of the children who had ridden his bikes, the laughter in the park, and the sense of pride he felt after each repair. He took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the tools, and tried again. Hours later, the bike was complete. Seeing it roll smoothly for the first time made every second of struggle worth it. David began documenting his work. He took photos of each bike he repaired, making notes of the improvements he had made. He started showing these pictures to neighbors and friends, explaining the process and the care he put into each repair. Slowly, people began to take notice. Some offered suggestions, others offered encouragement, and a few even offered small donations to help him buy materials. The support, however small, reinforced his belief that he was on the right path. As months passed, his small apartment began to feel more like a workshop. Tools were neatly arranged on shelves, parts were organized in boxes, and notebooks full of sketches and ideas lined the walls. The place was chaotic, yet it had its own rhythm. Each day, David moved through his space with purpose, focused on fixing, creating, and improving. The work gave him structure, discipline, and a sense of achievement that contrasted sharply with the monotonous factory life. One evening, after another long day, David sat by the window, looking out at the quiet streets. He reflected on how far he had come. The boy in the park, the little girl with braided hair, the delivery worker who bought his first bike, all of it reminded him that small steps could lead to meaningful results. He realized that his journey wasn't just about fixing bikes. It was about building confidence, resilience, and the courage to follow a dream. Every struggle, every doubt, every late night had taught him something valuable. By the end of this period, David had repaired and customized more than a dozen bikes. Each one was a small victory, a testament to his hard work and creativity. He had learned to embrace failure as part of the process, to see doubt as motivation rather than a limitation, and to trust in his own abilities. He had also begun to see that success wasn't just about achieving a goal, it was about the journey, the lessons, and the impact he could have on others along the way. Even though the future remained uncertain, David felt more confident than ever. He understood that challenges would continue to come, that the path would not always be smooth, and that setbacks would happen. But he also knew that he had the strength to face them. He had grown through struggle, learned through mistakes, and found joy in small victories. The spark that had begun in a quiet apartment months ago had grown into a steady flame of determination. David looked forward to the days ahead with cautious optimism. He didn't know exactly where his journey would lead, but he was ready to face whatever came next. The bikes, the children, the small sales, they were all proof that his dream was possible. And even when doubt surrounded him, as it always would, he had learned that determination could shine brighter than any fear or criticism. He closed his notebook that night with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The journey was far from over, but he felt ready. Every struggle, every small success, and every moment of learning had prepared him for the challenges ahead. David understood that the path to success wasn't a straight line. It was filled with twists, turns, and obstacles, but he was willing to walk it, step by step, fueled by determination and guided by the vision he had held for so long. And so, even as exhaustion pressed on his body and doubt lingered in his mind, David remained committed. He had learned that effort, persistence, and belief in oneself could create results even when the world said otherwise. Every repaired bike, every smile from a child, and every small acknowledgement from his neighbors reminded him that he was moving forward. He was not just surviving. He was building, growing, and proving to himself that he could fight for his dreams, one step at a time. By now, David's small world had begun to expand in ways he had never imagined. His evenings were still filled with repairing, painting, and customizing bikes, but his confidence had grown, and so had his vision. What had started as a personal escape from doubt had begun to take on a life of its own. Children in the neighborhood knew him by sight, sometimes stopping to wave or ask when the next bike would be ready. Parents started asking questions, some skeptical at first, some curious. Slowly, the spark of recognition that had seemed impossible months ago was beginning to glow. The first time he realized his work was gaining attention was a quiet afternoon at the park. A local teacher had noticed the children riding his bikes and stopped to ask where they came from. David hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should explain, but the teacher smiled warmly and encouraged him. "You've done something wonderful here," she said. "You should think about showing more people what you can do." That simple encouragement planted a seed in his mind. Maybe it was time to go beyond his small apartment and the park and let more people see what he could create. David started thinking about a small workshop. He didn't have much money, but he had been saving every extra penny from his factory job and the few bike sales he had made. He walked through the town, looking at empty storefronts and spaces that could be rented cheaply. He imagined one of those spaces filled with bikes, tools, children learning to ride and parents smiling with trust. The idea excited him but also terrified him. A workshop meant risk, responsibility, and more doubt from others. Yet deep down, he knew it was a risk worth taking. One afternoon, he found a small space on the edge of town that seemed perfect. The rent was low and the owner was willing to let him pay gradually as his business grew. David could barely contain his excitement. He signed the agreement with shaking hands, imagining the possibilities. That night, he stayed awake sketching the layout of the workshop, planning where each tool and bike would go, and thinking about how to make the place welcoming for children and their families. It felt real now, more real than anything before. Setting up the workshop was harder than he imagined. Moving the bikes, arranging tools, painting walls, and cleaning up took weeks. Sometimes exhaustion threatened to crush him. His body ached constantly, and the pressure of the investment weighed heavily on his mind. Every time he doubted himself, he remembered the first child riding one of his repaired bikes, the laughter in the park, and the sense of pride that had filled him. That memory became fuel, pushing him to work even when he felt he could not. Word of the workshop spread slowly. Some neighbors laughed at the idea. "Who would go there?" they asked. "He'll never make it." But David didn't let their words stop him. He focused on the small victories, the children who came by, the parents who smiled, and the few sales that trickled in. He began inviting neighbors to see the space, explaining his vision and showing the bikes he had repaired and customized. Slowly, curiosity replaced skepticism. People began to stop by, and some even offered encouragement or small donations to help him buy materials. David also realized the importance of sharing his story. He started taking small videos of his work, cleaning bikes, adjusting gears, painting frames, and teaching children how to ride safely. He posted them online, not expecting much, but wanting to show the process and the care he put into every project. To his surprise, the videos began to attract attention. Comments appeared praising his creativity, effort, and the joy he brought to the children. For the first time, David realized that his work could reach beyond his town, that people outside could see and appreciate what he was doing. One morning, he received a message from someone living in a nearby city. They had seen his videos and wanted to buy a custom bike for their child. It was the first time he had received interest from outside his immediate neighborhood. The excitement in David's chest was overwhelming. It was proof that his hard work, long hours, and determination were starting to pay off. For the first time, he saw that his dream wasn't just a personal escape. It could become something bigger, something that touched more lives than he had imagined. Even with this success, challenges continued to appear. Balancing the workshop, online messages, and his factory job left him exhausted. Some days he felt like he was moving in circles, taking one step forward and two steps back. Tools would break, bikes would be damaged, and mistakes were inevitable. Each setback brought frustration, but David had learned to see mistakes as lessons rather than failures. He reminded himself that progress was built on persistence, patience, and effort, not perfection. As the months went on, David's workshop slowly became a place of community. Children arrived after school, eager to learn and play. Parents stopped by, curious about the process and impressed by the care David put into each bike. He found himself teaching not just repair techniques, but lessons about patience, problem-solving, and creativity. Every interaction strengthened his resolve. He realized that his dream had grown beyond bikes. It had become a way to inspire, teach, and give back to the community that had doubted him. David also faced moments of fear. What if the interest faded? What if he couldn't keep up with the demand? What if something went wrong? These questions often haunted him at night. But he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Each morning he reminded himself that he was capable, that the effort he had put in mattered, and that the spark he had nurtured for so long could not be extinguished. Every small success became a reminder that he was moving in the right direction. One day, a local reporter visited the workshop after hearing about David's story. They wanted to see the bikes, talk to the children, and understand the journey that had brought him here. David was nervous but also proud. As he showed the workshop, explained his methods, and demonstrated repairs, he realized how far he had come. The reporter asked about the doubts he had faced, and David spoke honestly about the challenges, the skepticism, and the long nights. When the article was published, it highlighted not just his bikes, but his perseverance and determination. Suddenly, more people came to the workshop. curious to see the man who had refused to give up. This newfound attention brought opportunities and new challenges. Supplies became more expensive, the demand for bikes increased, and managing everything on his own became difficult. David began to consider hiring help, but he also worried about losing the personal touch that had made his workshop special. Every decision carried weight, and the responsibility of keeping his dream alive pressed on him. Yet he understood that growth required risk. To achieve more, he had to trust others and take chances. Through it all, David never lost sight of why he started. The spark that had ignited months ago remained at the core of his efforts. It reminded him that success wasn't just about recognition or profit. It was about creating joy, learning through struggle, and showing that determination could overcome doubt. Each child's laughter, each parent's smile, and each small step forward reinforced his belief that he was on the right path. The workshop became a place of pride. Walls were painted with bright colors, tools organized neatly, and bikes arranged to display creativity and effort. David's life, once confined to a monotonous routine, was now filled with movement, purpose, and community. He was no longer just repairing bikes. He was shaping experiences, building confidence in others, and showing that persistence could create real change. Even with growth and attention, David continued to work tirelessly. Long hours, physical strain, and the constant juggling of responsibilities tested him daily. There were nights when he would sit in the empty workshop, exhausted and unsure, wondering if the effort was worth it. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself of the children riding bikes, the smiles on parents' faces, and the message from the city that had trusted him with an order. Each reminder strengthened his resolve and fueled him to keep going. By the end of this period, David had transformed not just his work, but himself. The shy, uncertain man who had once doubted his abilities had grown into someone capable of leading, creating, and inspiring. His journey was far from over, but he had learned that determination could carry him through the hardest challenges. He had learned to embrace failure, face fear, and use setbacks as opportunities to grow. The workshop was proof of what dedication, creativity, and perseverance could achieve. David realized that the journey was about more than the bikes. It was about resilience, courage, and the ability to turn doubt into fuel. Every repair, every interaction, and every small success was a building block towards something larger. He began to dream not just of local impact, but of reaching more people, inspiring more children, and showing others that dreams were worth fighting for. And so, even as challenges continued, David stood ready. He had faced doubt, exhaustion, and fear, but he had not let them stop him. Each day in the workshop was a step forward, each repaired bike a testament to his effort. He understood that the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but he felt prepared. The spark that had started months ago had become a steady flame, illuminating the path forward and reminding him that determination, creativity, and resilience could overcome nearly anything. By now, David's life had changed in ways he never imagined. What had started as quiet nights repairing old bikes in a tiny apartment had grown into a bustling workshop filled with laughter, movement, and creativity. Children came after school, parents stopped by to ask questions, and neighbors who had once doubted him now nodded with quiet respect. The workshop had become more than a place to fix bikes. It had become a space of inspiration, community, and hope. Despite the growth and recognition, David never allowed himself to become complacent. Every morning he arrived early, making sure the space was clean, organized, and ready for the day. He checked the bikes, prepared materials, and reviewed his plans. His dedication had not waned. If anything, it had strengthened. He understood that his success was built on constant effort, creativity, and care. He knew that the moment he relaxed too much, the spark that had brought him this far could fade. One morning, a local school teacher arrived with a group of children. She had heard about David's work through the newspaper article and the online videos. The children were excited, chattering and laughing, eager to see the colorful bikes and try them out. David greeted each child with a smile, helping them onto the bikes, adjusting seats, and giving tips on riding safely. As he watched their faces light up with joy, he felt a sense of pride that went beyond words. This was what he had worked for, making a difference in the lives of others, even in small ways. Word about the workshop continued to spread. Parents from neighboring towns began visiting, drawn by the stories of David's creativity and dedication. Some came to buy bikes, others to have their old bicycles repaired, and some simply to learn from him. Each interaction brought new challenges, requiring patience, skill, and attention. But David embraced these challenges. He saw them as opportunities to grow, to improve, and to show the world what determination could achieve. With the growing interest came new opportunities. A local community center invited him to run a weekend workshop for children who didn't have access to bikes. David agreed immediately. He prepared materials, planned activities, and even designed small competitions for the children to enjoy. The workshop was a success. Children learned to ride, fix simple bike parts, and take care of their equipment. Parents expressed gratitude, and the center offered to collaborate further, opening doors that David had never imagined possible. Even as his reputation grew, David remained humble. He never forgot the months spent in his small apartment, repairing discarded bikes and fighting doubt. He knew that his achievements were the result of persistence, creativity, and the willingness to try despite fear. He often shared his story with visitors, emphasizing that challenges were part of the journey and that every step forward mattered, no matter how small. He wanted others to see that determination could overcome obstacles, and that dreams were worth pursuing. Not everything was easy. Managing the workshop, meeting demand, and keeping up with online messages was exhausting. Some days, David felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Tools broke, materials ran low, and mistakes happened. Each setback was a reminder that success required continuous effort. But he had learned to embrace these challenges. Every problem became a lesson, every mistake an opportunity to improve, and every delay a chance to practice patience. One particularly busy week, a large order came in from a family in a nearby city. They wanted 5 custom bikes, each designed differently for their children. It was the biggest order David had ever received. At first, the thought of completing it on time was overwhelming, but he organized his time, planned each step carefully, and worked tirelessly. Late nights, sore muscles, and exhaustion were part of the process, but he focused on the reward, the joy and satisfaction of delivering a product that would bring happiness to the children. The day the family arrived to pick up the bikes, David felt a mixture of nerves and pride. Each bike was finished perfectly, reflecting hours of work, creativity, and care. As the children mounted their bikes, their eyes bright with excitement, David felt a sense of accomplishment that words could not capture. It was a moment that validated every struggle, every late night, and every doubt he had ever faced. The family thanked him sincerely, and David realized that this was the impact he had always wanted to make. In the months that followed, David's workshop continued to grow. More children arrived, parents trusted him with repairs and purchases, and his online presence brought attention from even farther away. He had built not just a business but a community. People came not only for bikes but for guidance, encouragement, and inspiration. David had become a figure of determination, showing by example that it was possible to rise above doubt and create something meaningful. One evening, after a long day filled with laughter and work, David sat by the window of the workshop, looking out at the quiet streets. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The factory, the long nights in his apartment, the discarded bikes, the skepticism of neighbors and co-workers. It all seemed like a distant memory. He had faced doubt at every turn, yet he had not given up. Every obstacle had strengthened him, every challenge had taught him something, and every small victory had fueled his determination. David thought about the children who had learned to ride, the parents who trusted him, and the families who had received bikes he had repaired. Each smile, each word of gratitude, each moment of joy reminded him why he had started. The dream that had once felt fragile and impossible had become real. He realized that success was not only about personal achievement, but about the lives he had touched along the way. Even as recognition grew, David remained focused on the future. He began planning ways to expand the workshop, to reach more children, and to create programs that could teach them not only how to ride and fix bikes, but also lessons about patience, problem-solving, and creativity. He wanted to inspire others to follow their dreams, even when the world seemed filled with doubt. He knew that determination could be contagious and that sharing his journey could help others find their spark. One day, a local newspaper approached him for an interview. They wanted to feature his story, highlighting the journey from a factory worker to a community-focused entrepreneur. David agreed, not for fame or recognition, but to show others what was possible when someone refused to give up. The article described his long nights, the discarded bikes he had transformed, and the impact he had made on children and families. The story resonated with many, bringing more visitors to his workshop and expanding his reach. David also began mentoring other young people who had dreams but lacked direction. He shared practical tips, encouraged them to work patiently, and reminded them that failure was part of learning. He spoke about the importance of persistence, creativity, and believing in oneself. He wanted to show that success was not about avoiding challenges, but about facing them with determination and courage. Seeing others take the lessons to heart brought him a new sense of fulfillment. As his influence grew, David faced new decisions. He had opportunities to collaborate with larger organizations, participate in community events, and even start a small training program for aspiring repairers. Each opportunity was exciting, but required careful thought. He balanced ambition with caution, ensuring that each step aligned with his values and the mission he had built. He understood that true growth required patience, planning, and integrity. Despite the successes, David never lost sight of the struggles that had shaped him. He remembered the nights in his small apartment, the discarded bikes, the skepticism of those around him, and the doubts he had faced. Those memories reminded him to stay humble, work hard, and remain connected to the purpose behind his dream. He realized that the journey was ongoing, and that each new challenge was an opportunity to learn, grow, and inspire. One day, a group of children who had learned to ride at his workshop surprised him. They had painted small signs, decorated with their names and messages of thanks, and placed them outside the workshop. "Thank you for believing in us," one sign read. David felt a lump in his throat. The impact he had made was real, tangible, and deeply moving. It was a moment that crystallized the purpose behind every late night, every repair, and every challenge he had overcome. David understood that the greatest reward was not recognition or financial success, but the ability to touch lives and inspire hope. He had started as a man surrounded by doubt, uncertain and cautious, but he had grown into someone capable of creating change, teaching lessons, and igniting determination in others. The spark that had once seemed fragile had become a flame that now illuminated the path for many. Even as the future remained uncertain, David felt ready. He knew that challenges would continue, that obstacles would arise, and that doubts might still appear. But he also knew that he had the skills, resilience, and determination to face them. Each bike he repaired, each child he taught, and each smile he created was proof that persistence and belief in oneself could overcome nearly anything. David's journey had taught him that success was not a destination but a process, a combination of hard work, creativity, resilience, and the courage to keep moving forward despite fear. The workshop was more than a business. It was a symbol of determination, a space of learning, and a source of joy for the community. His story had become an example of what could happen when someone refused to let doubt define their life. In the year, quiet moments at the end of each day, David often reflected on how far he had come. From a small apartment, discarded bikes, and constant doubt, he had built something tangible, meaningful, and impactful. The journey had not been easy, but it had shaped him, strengthened him, and allowed him to touch lives in ways he could never have imagined. He understood that the journey was ongoing, and that each new challenge was another opportunity to grow, create, and inspire. As he closed the workshop for the night, David felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that the path ahead would not always be smooth, but he was ready. He had faced doubt, hardship, and uncertainty, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The spark that had started months ago had grown into a flame that would continue to burn, lighting the way forward for himself and for those whose lives he touched. David had learned the most important lesson of all. The world may doubt you, challenges may overwhelm you, and failure may visit you, but determination, persistence, and belief in oneself can create results beyond imagination. Surrounded by doubt, fueled by determination, and ready to face whatever came next, he had become the man he was always meant to be. The journey had been long, difficult, and filled with uncertainty, but the destination was not just success, it was impact, growth, and the knowledge that he had never given up. And so, David's story continued, a living testament to what was possible when one refused to let doubt win. Every repaired bike, every smile, and every small victory became a part of a larger journey, a journey defined not by fear, but by determination, courage, and the willingness to fight for dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem.